Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 63 of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, yeah, I know I've been gone for a really long time, and I'm sorry those of you who have written to me and asking me if I'm ill or something, but I'm actually fine. I've just been really insanely busy. I had a couple of major exhibitions in the last few months, which we'll end up talking about at some point here on Camera Position. And I also have had just a ton of response to the podcast, sometimes keeping up with responses to email and so forth is a little more time consuming than I thought. So here I am back for episode number 63. And what I wanted to do here is build upon episode number 62, Camera Position 62, where I talked about whether beauty is enough. And the reason I wanted to talk about that is I got some really interesting comments about it, both on the weblog page and also in email. It turned out to be one of the more popular podcasts that I have done in terms of response from people and also in terms of downloads. So I'm kind of curious about that and interested in following up a little bit. And actually, what has caused me to want to follow up is an email and also some weblog posts from David, in the UK. And David and I had a kind of a back and forth, both via email and also via weblog comment posts. And I thought it might be interesting for those of you who don't get a chance to go to cameraposition.com and take a look at those posts. I thought it might be interesting for you to participate a little bit in what David and I talked about, because I think it actually plays into a lot of the comments that I have about camera position in a general way, and a lot of ideas that I have about photography in general and teaching photography in particular. So bear with me for a second as I read you some things that David and I talked about. So David wrote, "Anyway, I have a question for you. I read Beauty in Photography," as you may recall, those of you who listened to podcast number 62, I had talked about Robert Adams' book, Beauty in Photography. So David says, "I read Beauty in Photography perhaps a year ago, and although I remember being affected and stimulated by it at the time, I had forgotten almost everything about the book before listening to this episode. As much as I enjoy reading all about photography, and I really do you have any advice for translating that reading into actual applicable learning and new insight that will stay with me for longer than the few days after finishing a book? I've never formally studied photography or art, and I'm only able to comment on the last book I picked up, forgetting the 10 before it and the innumerable websites and podcasts I use online. Have you any advice for someone without an arts background?" And the reason I wanted to read David in the UK's comment was partly to kind of introduce some comments that I made back to him, but also because, by golly, I get a lot of email and a lot of comments from people who are struggling to learn photography and know that my background involves both a Bachelor of Fine Arts and a Master of Fine Arts degree and years of teaching experience and so forth, and they feel like without that academic background, they're kind of hamstrung in some way and are unable to participate in some of the dialogue. So I thought I would read you something that I wrote back to David and see if that can be a springboard for some further comments. I wrote, "David, your question's a tough one. You asked, do you have any advice for translating that reading into actual applicable learning and new insight that will stay with me for longer than the few days after finishing a book? Do you have any advice for someone without an arts background?" I think that my answer to this is that you need to establish a context for the things that you read. If you start to think through the idea of how what you read connects with other things that you read and see and think, that may help. I've always thought that learning, real learning, not just memorization, is about synthesis. It's about putting 2, 3, or more ideas together to form a new idea that is uniquely your own. So by putting those ideas together and making your own idea, you own the learning in a way that you hadn't been able to before. A lot of that has to do with exposing yourself to the concepts you find in things like Adams' Beauty in Photography book. So, for example, if you don't know the work that he references, for example, 6 Persimmons or other drawings by Mucci, the films of Ozu, etc., then get yourself in front of those things, absorb them, and begin to understand the interconnections between those things. in reality, that's what art's background really is. It's about making those connections, and the only way to make the connections is to actually do the work of seeing, thinking, and synthesizing. And David seemed to find that advice really useful, and really was glad that I'd shared those ideas, and that he's concentrating rather on reading, watching, and viewing without paying attention to engaging it and learning well from it. And really, I think for me that's the key to all of this. That one of the things I've always felt about photography in a general way is that knowledge of it, training in it, if you will, is something that really helps us live a larger and more fulfilling life. So in many ways, it's like any other activity that we participate in on a deeper level, whether it's a relationship or whether it's a connection with the other in the universe, or whether it is something that we learn from literature or film, or simply just experiencing the world in a larger way. So like learning to love something or someone that at first seemed foreign, learning to see, I think, is a sort of a sharpening of an already extant sense. So while the passage of beauty may be tinged with the sense of sadness, there's something about knowing that you've seen it in the first place that makes it a joyous event, and being able to hold that moment with the click of a camera's shutter, even if it's imperfectly, is a great middle ground to occupy. So even if you're not able to perfectly get at what you want to express in your photographs, trying it and doing it, and synthesizing the knowledge that you already bring to the subject, synthesizing the knowledge of the world that you already bring to things, is really important. So often I have talked to my students, and certainly on the podcast here, about the importance of photographing things that you care about, photographing things that are important to you. Those are things that you already have some a priori knowledge of. You already kind of know some stuff about those things, and you already have some sense of what it is that those things are, and how that works for you. So I really think that understanding the interconnection of the importance of the things that we read, the things that we see, and the photographs that we see, and how those translate into the things that we're interested in already. So when you see a photograph that you really, really love, rather than trying to reinvent that photograph, rather than trying to remake the existing masterwork that somebody else has already done, try to see where you can bring the experience that you have in your own life into that, and see if you can figure out ways to take those concepts and bring them forward. The things that you already know, the things that you already have. If you love cooking, see what happens when you begin to photograph food and photograph foodstuffs. If you really love your lawn, it's springtime here in the Midwest, and the yard in front of my house kind of looks like some sort of a wild jungle. I'm not a big lawn guy, but if you really love your lawn and you take great care of your lawn, well, how can you make photographs of that express your joy about having that lush green lawn in front of your house? Whatever it is that kind of gets you going, gets those juices flowing, that may be the most important part of how photography works for you. And really, ultimately, that's what this arts education deal is. So for those of you who are out there who are just learning photography and are coming to photography from a variety of different avenues, I really think that the key is to this whole arts background thing is that whole notion of synthesis. What do you love? What's interesting to you? And even the things that aren't interesting to you, go ahead and embrace them and find out what they're about. If you see a reference in a book to something you just don't understand, find that thing. Wrap yourself around it, watch that film, or engage that painting in some way, and see what it is that you can find out from that, and put that together with what you already know to produce something that is new and uniquely your own. So there are some ideas about this beauty in photography that really kind of prompted some great discussion on the weblog and some wonderful emails back and forth with people who are listening to the podcast. So please, for those of you who are out there listening, please do go to cameraposition.com and take a look at the comments that are in the comments section of the weblog. I'm always interested in hearing what people have to say, and especially interested when a dialogue begins. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope to see you back again real soon on the next episode of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Camera Position is a proud member of the Photocast Network, your photo resource in the potosphere. photocastnetwork.com